This is the Ripple Effect of Wellbeing in Work and Life. I'm Dr. Ken Thompson, here with Dr. Stephanie Romero.
On this show, we explore how holistic well-being practices can transform our individual lives and our collective capacity for care.
We're bringing you the science, the stories, and the specific practices that reduce stress and build resilience in our homes, our offices, and our communities.
We're talking to people to see how their perspectives, practices, and work are creating a ripple effect for a better world.
Thanks for joining us.
Today on the Ripple Effect podcast, we are diving deep into the intersection of mindfulness and leadership. Joining me is the brilliant Tina Raspanti with her master's in education and her certification in applied positive psychology. Tina is a retired educator who has dedicated her professional life to teaching positive psychology and mental well-being. From training student athletes in mental performance to helping schools become more compassionate spaces, her work is and has been transformative. On a personal note, Tina is a dear friend of mine, and I've seen firsthand the heart she puts into everything she does. So I'm really happy and grateful to be talking to you today, Tina. Thank you for agreeing to be on my podcast.
Thanks for having me, Stephanie. It's fun to be here and being in conversation with you.
Excellent. So I don't know this about you, although we've known each other for a little while, but I don't actually know, and this is the question I love to ask everyone, how you first got on to meditation and mindfulness. So I would love to hear your story.
Yeah, thanks for asking it. It's definitely non-traditional, I think, and I think like life, people always will draw that line on the board and say life isn't linear. It's more like the squiggly line. And I would say that my path for mindfulness has been that way as well. If I go back to I'm guessing here, but I think it was around 2006. I had already, I would say from teaching psychology and my interest in psychology, I would read about mindfulness and meditation, within the context of the class and consciousness and things. But I had read Elizabeth Gilbert's Eat, Pray, Love book. And at the time, I was also going through a divorce. And so identified and dreamed of her travels as, she was traveling to a memoir, how she described traveling to those places. And it kind of inspired me to say, okay, it was summertime. And as a teacher, I was at home during the summer, and I thought I'm going to give this a try. I'm really going to, want to try it. I would sit out on my front porch and I would sit there and I'm going to say, try to meditate. But I will say that where I am now, obviously almost 20 years later, I didn't have a good definition of what mindfulness was back then. When I was sitting there, I thought that you were supposed to not think about things, that somehow I was supposed to be able to still my mind. And so as I sat there, I would have thoughts that come up, and I was not trained, and I didn't really know what I was doing. I was just sitting on my porch breathing and trying to be still. And I would say that by the end of that summer, I thought that I had failed and that maybe this practice isn't for me. But I would definitely attribute that to a misunderstanding of what I now see mindfulness as, which, is that paying attention on purpose in a very specific way. And so I stopped. I kind of quit at that point. And I would say that over the course of the next 5 years, I still stayed curious. And I had started to take different classes and different types of practices, including MBSR there in Pittsburgh. And, there were different centers, that I knew were happening. And I'd gone to a lot of conferences. Specifically, there was one called Wisdom 2.0 that between 2014 and 2019. I went to like probably 5 times. Like, I really liked the conference, and there are a lot of practitioners, and I heard from a lot of wonderful speakers. And so, anyways, I think that I actually went and met with David Creswell at CMU. And I told him that I was getting ready to start. Was creating this intro to positive psych type of class, and that I was on my own meditative journey. And I knew that he had done research, and he was very supportive. And he introduced me to mindfulness and plain English. And I would say that that was a restart, in my journey. And I'm going to guess that was around 2012 or 2013. And so that's sort of like obviously things happened along the way too, but that was my journey to my practice.
Awesome. I love that you started with Eat, Pray, Love and ended up with Bhante Gunaratana. Like how that like that's such an awesome trajectory
That's an
there.
arc.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. It's a real journey there. That's amazing. And so, all of us, we have our journeys to getting to practice. And then, like, but you not just started practicing in your life, like, you really have integrated it into your career, and made it part of what you do. I mean, you're now just recently retired, but what you have done in your career as a teacher. And so I would really love to know, like, how did that happen? How did you decide, like, oh, I should have a class at school and I should start working with this at school?
Again, I'm going to go back to my studies, in psychology and my experience at Wisdom 2.0. The first time I went to Wisdom was in 2014. And that was the same year that I was starting that course at the high school. And a lot of the people there were from the business world. A lot of business people, a lot of healthcare people. There were very few educators. And I think at that point in time, like, I was yearning for like an educator community, like, to help support what that integration could look like. From a research perspective and a teacher education, like, I could read studies and I could look at the benefits of having some type of practice, whatever that might be. And so I met one man, his name is Ronnie Habib, and he had taught at the same time I was starting my class. He had started just the year before a positive psych class in Palo Alto. And so he was doing that work. So he was a good inspiration, and we had connected at Wisdom. And then, like, that's how you and I connected, and Michelle King and other people that were in education and on their own mindfulness journeys and looking at ways that this might show up in an education setting. So I think being inspired by Wisdom and then trying to create that type of community here in Pittsburgh.
Yeah, yeah. Amazing, amazing. I didn't know about the California connection as well. Yeah, that's great. And then I guess I'm just really, really curious now that like, I imagine you're retired and you have all this space and time in your life, which I know is true and not true from other friends that I have that have retired. What does your daily practice look like now that you have more space and time?
I would say that a lot of you talk about daily practice, I think people imagine like they think about sitting, right? Like how we sit or that. And I wouldn't say that that has changed tremendously from pre-retirement to post-retirement. I have a morning practice, where I sit, but it's not I know some people will be like, I sit for 45 minutes, or I sit for, it might be like a 8 to 12 minute sit. So I have like that type of practice. But and this will come up in our conversation, but my biggest mentor is a man named George Mumford. And I had gone on a retreat years ago. And the name of the retreat was my life is my practice and my practice is my life. And what he has really, encouraged in my learnings over the years it's about how we live our lives. So we might do that sit every day, whether it's 3 minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 40 minutes. We do that to kind of build the repetition and practice of being present. And so I think of my practice like, if I am spending time with my granddaughter, am I really present? Am I looking at her? Am I engaged with her? So if I'm talking to a friend on the phone, so like, how present am I and how aware am I of my surroundings and my circumstances? And that's always a practice. I'm not saying I'm the best at it, I'm saying that it is a constant practice. The biggest difference between the retirement and before and after is I definitely feel more freedom. I feel freedom that it's just beautiful, like having left the constrictions of a belt schedule.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Yeah, so thinking about bringing the practice fully into your life, which I love. I absolutely love that. I'm curious, so you taught the positive psychology class, which included the meditation and the mindfulness. How do you think your practice shifted you as an educator?
So funny because like I mean definitely crediting my practice. I think some of it is age. Um I think that there were like people that knew me over the couple of decades that I spent in my career in Pittsburgh in public ed. You know, um, I might come off as like touchy feely, or I remember when different studies about referring to things as soft skills, and trying to say, hey, this stuff is worth it, and show people the research and things like that. What I would say is how about me showing up is again, the freedom to just show up and to like try to create a classroom environment that was really what I wanted. Of course, I taught AP Psych too. That was my other class that I taught. I had to teach AP curriculum. My kids are taking the AP exam. I'm going to be evaluated on how those scores look. So we have to do that job. But I was more conscious about trying to create an environment where kids felt accepted. This is Carl Rogers. This isn't Tina. So I don't want to, but we hope that you feel genuine, accepted, and some empathetic type of classroom. And I would say that like the 21-22 school year, so I mean, I've been doing it for a long time, and that's more recent in history. But there was something about that year that like I felt free to like let like love be centered in the classroom too. The kids never doubted, I hope, that they were cared for, right? Or that this is I hate the word safe space because like we can't tell other people that the same, but tried to create like a compassionate space that they felt like that, hey, it's okay in here for 47 minutes a day.
Yeah, yeah, so important for teens especially, right? And I'm just realizing that we've been talking about positive psychology, and I would love it if you could give us your definition of positive psychology, because I think that the name of it might just give the impression that it's just about being happy. And so I would
Yeah,
love for
yeah.
you to just like say for you, what is positive psychology, and
Yeah.
and
Yeah. So
yeah.
there are a lot of people who started positive psych, but one of the people that's credited most often as a founder is Martin Seligman, who's still alive. He's a professor emeritus out of Penn. Um, but he remembers like after it was started first taking off, there was an article in Time magazine with a smiley face, and he said he was so like that wasn't what it was all about, right? And I always would tell my kids, we talk about the different like optimism versus pessimism. And I would always tell them that I'm a realistic optimist, meaning that I choose to try to work on having an optimistic attitude in the way that I live. but I'm completely realistic about the world that we live in, and that there are horrific things that happen every day. And if I sat in some of that news, I could weep, right? So it's not about rose-colored glasses and about being happy all of the time. I think of positive psychology, and again, it's another kind of Seligman loosely translated quote. But psychology had spent so much time and all of its focus on trying to diagnose, treat, and cure things that went wrong in the mental health world. And so the shift here, like in the late 90s, early 2000s, when it was taking off, was to have a rigorous scientific study of practices that could help people improve their own health, their own mental well-being or mental health. So I would always tell the kids that there's like a toolkit, if you will, and throughout the semester they would be exposed to lots of different research-based, evidence-based practices that have the potential to improve well-being. That we're not suggesting you use every tool all the time, but by sharing these different tools with them, that hopefully, like, there might be something in there, whether that's mindfulness or gratitude or awe, but like something that speaks to you and that, hey, I can go to this and I can use this practice. I mean, it was a long-winded response. I mean, I think of positive psychology as research-based skills to improve mental well-being would be like a really simple sentence.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, no, I love the juxtaposition between diagnosis, right, and pathologizing, or focusing on what we can do to increase mental health and well-being, right? I love that. Yeah. Well, the other thing that I know about you is that you have also worked with educators, not just students, to bring mindfulness to them. Um, I guess I would love for you to just talk about how you have worked to support folks, but also like, myself being a former educator, knowing like burnout is high. Uh, Anything could be going on for you in your life, and you've got 30 young people in front of you that you're responsible for, that you're, like you said, you're being evaluated on, you kind of getting that information into their into their heads, so to speak. So yeah, like I would love to hear about what your experience has been doing that, and like any advice for educators from that experience.
Yeah, I love that, you and I have talked before. People use lots of analogies: pouring from an empty cup, running on an empty tank, right? Um, yeah, I've read things and know things that I know you do too as well. And we've both been through a care training. So one of the organizations that I work with is called CARE, which stands for Cultivating Awareness and Resilience and Education. There's been quite a bit of research behind it, but it's a type of professional development training that really focuses on giving educators specific skills that they can use, just as we were talking about, those other tools that they can use to try to um, be more self-aware, to be able to regulate emotions, and to care for their own well-being. And we know, as you and I know, and I'm sure any teacher that would be listening to this would know, is there's a direct relationship and correlation between how we are and how our students are. There's a really interesting study that was done, I think it was with a pre-kindergarten or pre-K class or kindergarten students, where they had the teachers fill out anxiety stress questionnaires. And then they took saliva from the students in the classroom and they measured cortisol levels. And there was a strong correlation between how the kids were showing up and how the teachers. Now, anybody who knows correlation knows that just means it's a relationship. The kids could be stressed and that could be impacting the teacher. A teacher could be stressed, that can be impacting the kids. And so if we can like provide teachers with any skills that might help them to be emotionally aware, have some tools to maybe take some pauses to be able to reset themselves. it will help them show up for their kids and hopefully have an impact on, fostering the environment within their classroom.
Yeah, I love the way that you framed that piece of research that like we are in some kind of interconnected relationship with our students where we're impacting them and they're impacting us. We know this about like our mirror neurons, right? Like we're constantly reflecting back what we see in the other and that's influencing our mental and emotional state. And so, helping the kids self-regulate helps the teacher self-regulate helps the kids. Like that's what I was kind of thinking about as you were saying that it's some, when we think of classrooms, it's all interconnected in that way. Yeah.
I love that you brought the kids back into it in that way because
Yeah.
as adults and like, people who spent their lives in classrooms, they know us. And if we're off, like they sense it too. And they'll be like, hey, like, what's wrong? Are you all right? What's going on? So especially, I guess, with my experience working with high school students, it is, it's a relationship, that goes both ways.
Yeah, exactly. And there is this idea, at least that I've heard from a lot of teachers, that they just want to fix the kids. But sometimes we have to work with ourselves to fix the kids.
And sometimes I think it's important, like, let's say that I was maybe short tempered or upset about something and maybe I snapped. I think there's such a lot living kind of lesson moment that if I can just name it in front of the students and say, listen, I wish I didn't say that. I'm feeling this. And it's actually just like kind of modeling right in front of them that we're human. We're not super, I mean, I know people might have different, analogies but we are human too. We feel everything too. And we're modeling, hey, I just named it and I'm trying to tame it, right? I'm trying to regulate it in this moment and make an adjustment instead of just going with it.
Yeah,
Uh,
absolutely. That as I developed my own practice became one of the things that I did in my classroom is like I have this vivid memory actually. I turned around to write something on the board and I heard a noise and I turned back around and one student had pushed over the chair of another student. The kid was on the ground, right? They apparently had a fight the night before at football practice or something like that, right? And like my immediate thing was like first I made sure that kid was okay, but I was like so upset, right? And I looked at all the student faces and this was middle school, not high school. They were all horrified, right? And so I just said that was really upsetting for me. I'm glad so and so's okay, but I think we all just need to pause for a moment. And then I guided them with some breathing, right? Because before I was going to decide what my next step was, I just knew I needed to settle because I felt so keyed up in that moment, right? And all those eyes are on you, thinking that you know exactly what the best thing to do is. And we don't always know what exactly the best thing to do is, right? So I think
and
that,
sometimes, yeah, naming it teaches that, like,
yeah,
is a great lesson.
it is. It is. And like just acknowledging that we need to take a moment and pause gives them permission, right? To take a moment and pause, which we don't build that into school much.
Now, and think about like the world that we live in right now and technology and everything is pulling for their attention constantly.
Yeah.
And so teaching, whether it's adult or students, whoever, like that purposeful
Yeah.
pause is such an important lesson.
Yeah.
And that I know this is getting into a little bit of our mindfulness language, right? But when we're able to pause, we have a better opportunity to respond rather than simply reacting to something, sending the text too quickly, saying something, and it's everything is so instantaneous now. So teaching, I think that pause is super important.
Yeah. Yeah. Really, really, really true. So the other piece that I wanted to bring in is you also have done a lot of work, and I think it's through your work with George Mumford with athletes, right? Student athletes. And so I would just love, a couple of whatever takeaways you have from that work with student athletes. What do you think their challenges are, and what's the work you've been doing to help them?
Yeah, if in some ways it feels like, as we're going through these questions, that I feel like I'm like jumping across little puddles on my journey and it like little switches. But I want to just say that I think it's important for, I don't care if you're a young person or an adult, but to follow your curiosity. I know a lot of people would say follow your passion, and I'm not sure, 10, 20 years ago, if you would have asked me what my passion was, that I would have named these things. But the fact that I have been curious and have continued to read and study about all the things that I'm curious about is what has led me down this road. So it was again through wisdom. I had gone to like the conference a number of times I told you, and before I even met like George for the first time, there was another man named Michael Gervais, Dr. Michael Gervais. He's a sports psychologist, and he has worked with Olympians and he works with Microsoft business people. But he had worked with Pete Carroll and the Seattle Seahawks through their 2 Super Bowl runs under Pete Carroll. And I had heard Michael speak, and he really kind of just drew me in the way that he was talking about sports psychology and mental performance and mindfulness and as a part of that like approach. And then I ended up reading George's first book, which is called The Mindful Athlete. And this is in 2016 now. I had gone to Wisdom, and George was speaking there. And then he was also, this is during my sabbatical. I took a sabbatical where that was the year that I worked on my positive psychology certification, took lots of mindfulness and emotional intelligence courses and things. And so I was on sabbatical and I was at this conference. And after Wisdom, George was doing a separate workshop for coaches and people interested in sports performance. There was a very small group of about 30 people, and I went to that session. And there's a way, there's wonderful mindfulness teachers in the world, and there's lots of books and written. There's a way that George talks and teaches that is just so relatable. And I think part of it is the way that we share our stories. And I just really connected with him and was inspired by him. And so he started offering, after that first initial workshop, some online things. And then several years ago, he started something called the Mindful Athlete course. And so I've been studying under him for close to a decade now. And which led me to bring, speakers and work with the athletic director, John Grogan, at our high school, and some of our coaches that were interested in this work too. And let that naturally evolve, that I ended up working with some of the teams and some individual athletes. And kind of a beautiful ribbon on my retirement is this past spring, George was going to be speaking at Youngstown University. And because I had collaborated with the team, so George has this mindful athlete course, I said, and then they talked about trying to create a course for student athletes. And so there's a guy on George's team, his name's Rocky Aliberti, who is a dear friend who's come out to Mount Lebanon before. And we worked with together to create the 6-week program. And so Mount Lebanon participated in a study where we had athletes from all of our different sports teams engage in the 6-week program. And so we had really fantastic results. We're working with Michael Chiminia, and we have a draft of a manuscript that we hope to submit to the Journal of Applied Sports Psychology soon. We're close to crossing the finishing line on that. But because of that relationship and all of those works that work together, George was coming to Youngstown, they reached out and said, "Hey, do you want to have lunch?" And I said, "How about coming and visiting the kids?" And so George came to the high school and had a session with a group of students. It was really beautiful. And it was kind of, if we think about the arc of a journey, it was wonderful to have him in Lebo after all the work that he's inspired over the past decade.
Yeah, that's an amazing story. So what do you think are the benefits that the student athletes felt? Like what supports do you think they received? Or yeah, how can you sum up the benefits that you think they had?
I have so many great quotes from the kids from the study that I could share with you, but I'd have to like go look at that later. Um, but I think they learned that even though they were working on this mental side of their game, we call it inside the game, the inside game, right? Is within rather than thinking about the actual performance. And they talked a lot about how the skills that they were practicing impacted and had benefits in the classroom and in their own life as well as on the field. Some of the big kind of lessons that I think are important. One is just about identity. You know, when people are coaches or athletes, and you could do this in any position, but we often refer to them by, hey, coach, right? We might not even use their name, or football player, or whatever, like the thing is that student is involved in. Um, and that doesn't put them first. And so we talk a lot about, hey, and I know this might sound a little, but you're a human being first. You're a human being who plays lacrosse. You're a human being who plays basketball, right? Like that, we're that first. When we identify with that sport first and we're completely caught up in it, if there's somebody's injured or something happens, you know, it can really be hard for that young person to grapple with. Um, I think one of you had mentioned to me earlier, like some of the takeaways for the kids. Um, there's one thing we talk a lot about, we call it next play speed or next play. And it really has to do with our self-talk, like in the midst of practice or performance. And, if we were talking mindfulness, you and I, we could say it's about letting go, right? But like, if a kid's up at the foul line and they're about to shoot a foul shot, if they miss that shot, two things can occur, right? One is they can get caught up in that I just missed it, and they can do some negative self-talk, and it could affect like them being able to move on to the next play. And so using that phrase, next play, is just a way of trying to like, we're gonna let that go, and then we're gonna keep going to the next play in the game.
That idea of next play like is so relevant in our lives, right? Like not
Yes,
just in sports, but just in our
absolutely.
lives in general, like just knowing like, and actually like I've heard so many meditation instructors say, and probably even said it myself in giving instruction, like every new breath is that new opportunity to start again, right? It's it's always that opportunity. Like so you get distracted, you come back. Well, great, you get to start all over again, right? That's a fantastic lesson for all of us to learn.
And I'll say to them too that listen, there is something to learning from mistakes, right? Like so like if you're post game and you want to watch film with your coach and you're gonna like look at something. So but we just in the midst of it, in the midst of practice, in the midst of the game, you want to be able to just keep moving, to that next play. So it's trying to be discerning, right? In that moment right now, I'm gonna just keep moving.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I think we're starting to come to the end of our time, so I wanted to make sure to check in with you. Is there anything that you were hoping to talk about or you think is important to add that I didn't ask or you didn't already cover?
No, I feel like you touched upon a lot of various points of my journey. but one of those, of course, was meeting you. You were
Yeah.
part of that community, so I want to just thank you for being a co-conspirator in the education and mindfulness world, but above that, of course, is friendship. So
Yeah,
thank you.
thank you. Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I have had such a blessing in meeting you and so many other educators that made me feel back before Awaken Pittsburgh, not alone in trying to figure out how to do this in my classroom and in my life. So, yeah, that solidarity and support was key for me too. So appreciating you and all the other teachers, um,
Yes.
including you mentioned Michelle King that introduced us. So including her was super important. And so for other folks listening, like find a buddy if you're feeling
Yes.
alone. It's so important. And you can do it online now. Like back in our day, I don't know that there were online communities doing this, but there are now. There are now.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Well,
Thank you.
you have named so many resources in this conversation that I've been trying to track, taking notes of that we'll put in the notes for folks. But I always love, is there one book or resource that has really felt like a support to you in your practice that you would want to share?
I've already mentioned, like, probably, as far as like a book that has had created like a spark and a change in my life, it's going to be George's The Mindful Athlete. And I remember it's funny because my student, like, I remember a student coming to me, like, what made you so interested in this? Like, because I look like a nana, which I am. Um, but yeah, there's a couple other books. If I don't know that, besides George has come out with another book now as well, but for the mindful athlete, I mentioned mindfulness in plain English earlier. And then Dr. Michael Gervais has a great book that he came out with that's called The First Rule of Mastery. And it has a lot to do with not worrying about what anybody else thinks, right? And the autonomy of our own minds. And then finally, I know that this isn't necessarily obvious, but Dacher Keltner is a professor at UC Berkeley, and his book is Awe. And I know people talk a lot about gratitude and gratitude practices. That comes up in the mindfulness world, that comes up in the positive psych world. And I just had a conversation with a good friend, actually it was Rocky last week, and I said that I think awe is a cousin of gratitude. And when we talk about gratitude, people often talk about perspective shifting, right? Like that when we're grateful, we can't, it can help us to shift our perspective. For me personally, with my love of nature, I feel like awe, AWE, in case I'm not enunciating well, awe has the potential to shift my perspective as well. And I really appreciate Dacher's work in getting like the science behind it too out in the world. So those would be like my four, I guess I gave
I love
rapid
that.
fire.
No, I love that. And I love that you brought in you had mentioned it when you talked about the positive psychology earlier, but yeah, and when we are, I will speak for myself. When I center myself and everything becomes about me, which, our minds go there every once in a while, when we put ourselves in those spaces of awe, it just reminds us and puts things in perspective, right? We're just this little speck in this wonderful universe, this little bit of stardust in this big, beautiful universe, right? So I think you're right. The awe is inspirational, but also gives that great perspective.
The shift in perspective. For
Yeah.
me, it's I love the water, I love ocean, and I love
Yes.
the mountains. And I took a transatlantic cruise a couple of years ago, and being in the middle of the ocean where there's no land around, right? Like sitting in the expanse of that water, and like again, like you said, it's so rejuvenating to, like I'm here for this moment in time. I think sometimes with the pace of life that we either people perceive or people try to make us perceive, we think of time. We don't have time for anything in the pace of life. And when you sit in those big spaces, it's such a beautiful reminder of like, my time is limited. I'm just here for a visit. It's just a blank.
Yep,
You know,
exactly.
and to be more present and more appreciative of the time we do have.
Yeah. Well, that's probably the most beautiful way we could end it.
Thanks, Beth.
No, thank you, Tina. I appreciate you taking your time to do this. I really, really appreciate it.
Well, it's an honor to be with you and share the space. So thank you.